Hi everyone, I'm a tax pro and today we're going to talk about employer forms that need to be filed for the end of the year. So I'm going to go over the federal forms and then we're going to briefly touch on state and local. Obviously I can't cover all 50 states and all the localities that come with that. So I'll give you some information about the different forms that may need to be filed in your state and in your locality. But I'm going to cover all the federal forms that you may need to file. So when it comes to employee tax returns, what I'm talking about is W-2 employees. So I know a lot of small businesses will say, well, I have an employee contractor, an independent contractor that is an employee. Technically, those are not employees for tax purposes, okay? Those are considered independent contractors. I'm not gonna cover those today. However, there is a video on our YouTube channel regarding 1099 NECs, so non-employee compensation, and 1099 miscellaneous, which would cover like rent. So you can watch those videos to get information on independent contractors. Technically, those independent contractors or those 1099 employees, like some business owners call them, those aren't actual W-2 employees. They're not actual employees according to the IRS, okay? So I'm gonna cover W-2 employees today. If you need information on 1099 contractors or what some people call 1099 employees, that's in a different video. So that's with 1099 NEC, okay? And you do want to make sure that those are truly contractors and not W-2 employees, because employee misclassification is a very common thing that we see in small businesses. And so you do want to make sure that you're paying them appropriately, you're filing the appropriate forms. Okay, let's go into what we need to file from an employer standpoint. So you'll notice that the first thing that I have pulled up is Form 941, and it says Employer's Quarterly Federal Tax Return. I know we're talking about annual forms, but I do want to cover Form 941 because this is a form that, first off, it is due at the end of the year for quarter 4, but it is a very important employee payroll form, okay? So I'm going to cover 941. I'm also going to cover the alternatives to 941s that you might see as a small business owner. So 941s are a quarterly return. I'm going to briefly show you what it looks like. This is the About page at the IRS, by the way. These About pages are very helpful. So normally you'll be able to get the actual form itself and you'll get a link to the instructions. So let's look at Form 941. You'll notice that this is essentially reporting information on federal income tax, Social Security, and Medicare that has been withheld from an employee's paycheck or that the employer owes, and we're essentially reconciling for the payroll for that quarter. So the first thing you're going to fill out up here is the EIN information and your business information, okay? You're then going to select what quarter you are filing for. So at the end of the year, we would be filing for quarter 4 as long as we're filing these timely. You're then going to go through and you're going to enter information about the number of employees that you had, the wages, tips, and compensation that they received on line 2. Line 3 is going to be where you're going to show the federal income tax that was withheld, okay? You calculate the federal income tax withheld from each paycheck through withholding tables, and you determine which withholding tables to use based on that employee's W-4 that they fill out when they're initially hired. Okay, so federal income tax, we're going to report what we've withheld from wages, tips, and other compensation. We're then going to go through and we're going to calculate Social Security and Medicare in lines 5A through 5E. Okay, so we're going to total it on 5E. There's then potentially some adjustments that you may have. And then you are going to look over the total deposits that you've made. So deposits are made throughout the quarter. Okay, deposits are not made necessarily with this form. Now, if you have an underpayment and you owe money, then you would then calculate that on this form and then pay that amount. But you should be remitting payroll taxes throughout the quarter. Okay, your deposit schedule is going to be dependent on the amount of payroll that you're running. Okay, And then you're going to go down here and answer some questions about your withholding and your deposit schedule, and then put any third-party designee information. Paid preparer use goes on here. They also include a voucher in the event that you have a underpayment, okay? So that's Form 941. This is a quarterly form, like I said, but it is due at the end of the year for quarter 4. It's also extremely important that as an employer, you understand if you are filing 941s. So if you're a small employee, you might not necessarily file 941s. The majority of people watching this video probably will file 941s. There is a very, very small form, 944, for employers' annual federal tax return. This is designed so the smallest employers, those whose annual liability for Social Security, Medicare, and withheld federal income tax is $1,000 or less, okay? So this is an annual form. This takes place of the 941 for very, 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 very small employers, okay? The majority of you will not fall under this category. This is a very small employer. I've had people ask me, well, I'm a small employer, so why are we filing 941s instead of 944s? Well, because you're probably not only subject to depositing $1,000 or less for the year, right? So this is Form 944. It looks very similar to 941. Very similar, except you are going to have the deposit schedule broken out for the whole entire year. And then, other than that, it's almost really identical. You have your voucher at the end. Okay, so that's 944. Most likely you're not filing 944s. Okay, so that's Form 944. We've covered 941s. Now let's talk about Form 943. So Form 943 is for agricultural employees. So these are going to be ag businesses, essentially. Okay, and this is an annual form instead of a quarterly form. So it looks a little different than Form 941, but in all reality, the content is very similar. It just looks different. So again, you're going to put your information as the employer. You're going to have number of employees paid. You're going to have wages subject to Social Security tax. This looks a lot similar or pretty much identical to what we've already seen, right? You're going to have your monthly summary of federal tax liability, and this is going to be very similar to what we saw in that 944, right? So instead of doing the quarterly summary, we have to do a summary for the whole entire year because this is an annual form. And once again, you have a voucher at the end, okay? So that's Form 943. So at the end of the year, if you have W-2 employees, you're going to be filing a 941, a 943, or a 944, okay? That is for federal income tax, Social Security tax, and Medicare tax. Now, there's additional taxes on the federal side, right? We haven't covered unemployment. Unemployment is a different form. Let me pull this up. Unemployment goes on Form 940. So this is the employer's annual federal unemployment tax return, or FUTA. They call it FUTA. You may also see SUTA, so SUTA for state unemployment tax. Okay, so this is FUTA. So this is the Federal Unemployment Tax Act tax. This is reported on Form 940. This form is annual. There's not a quarterly form here, okay? This is where you're going to calculate the amount of federal unemployment tax due. You're going to reconcile, right? So federal unemployment tax has a little bit of a different deposit schedule than your federal income tax, your Social Security, and your Medicare tax. This looks a little bit different. This is going to potentially be deposited annually, although some businesses have to pay throughout the year, okay? Now, this looks kind of like the Form 941 at the start. So you have your EIN and your business information. You're gonna put the type of return if any of these apply. So if you have an amended return, no payments to employees in 2024, if you're a successor employer, or if this is the final 940, okay? Then it wants you to tell them about your return. Did you have pay state unemployment tax in one state only? If you had state unemployment tax in more than one state, you are a multi-state employer, okay? Now, it wants to know your total payments to all employees. And then it wants to know your payments that are exempt from FUTA tax. So there are certain payments that are exempt from FUTA tax. It wants you to tell them, the IRS, what types of payments you are claiming are exempt, okay? There are instructions for Form 940. These instructions are very helpful. So this is going to tell you lots of good information, okay? So this is going to tell you who must file Form 940. There are some employers that do not have to file Form 940. When must you file? Where do you file? So this is where you send the form in. And then when must you deposit your FUTA? So we've talked about this. This is the chart that essentially helps you know when you need to deposit your unemployment tax. Okay, so then this is going to help you complete your Form 1040. Takes a minute to get to the actual instructions. But this gives you a step-by-step process on how to complete your Form 1040, okay? So total payments to all employees. And then it is going to it's essentially going to tell you what payments are exempt from FUTA right here, okay? Now, once you determine what payments are exempt, you also need to determine the total of payments made to each employee that is in excess of $7,000. Now, why is this? Because only the first $7,000 of qualifying wages are subject to federal unemployment tax, okay, for each employee throughout the year. So if I pay Sally $6,500 for the year, and let's say all those wages are subject to FUTA tax, then my base rate for Sally is $6,500. If I pay Sally $20,000 throughout the year, my base rate for the FUTA tax is $7,000. Okay, I never pay FUTA tax over that $7,000 in compensation per employee. Now, let's say I paid Sally $20,000 in 2024. My base wage for that FUTA tax for Sally in 2024 is $7,000. I pay Sally $50,000 in 2025. I again have to start over at the beginning of the year, and that first $7,000 of Sally's wages are subject to FUTA, okay? So that's why it has this total of payments made to each employee in excess of $7,000, because you're going to subtract that, essentially. Okay? And then it's going to have your total taxable FUTA wages, and then FUTA tax before adjustments. So that's where you're going to calculate it, and then you're going to go through, do any adjustments, and then calculate any overpayments or underpayments. It's then going to have you report and calculate your FUTA tax by quarter if line 12 is more than $500, because if it has reached more than $500, then you need to be paying more than once a year. Then it's going to have a voucher at the end, okay? So that's your federal unemployment. So we've covered your federal withholding return and your federal unemployment return, okay? Now let's talk about W2s. W2s are a little bit different. So the forms that we just talked about are filed with the IRS. W-2s are actually filed with the Social Security Administration, and then the Social Security Administration sends that information to the IRS. A lot of people don't realize that. You're actually filing W-2s with the Social Security Administration. Don't send them to the IRS, please. Okay, so let's talk about W-2s. I'm still going to show you the About page on the IRS website for W-2s because I think it's very helpful. But you're not actually filing your W-2s with the IRS. These are actually filed with the Social Security Administration. Okay, so W-2s are an annual form that an employer files with the Social Security Administration in order to report wages that are paid to employees. The W-2 is issued to employees. So if you have ever had a W-2 job, you're familiar with W-2s, right? You get the W-2 in January of the following year. You use that to file your taxes, okay? Let me show you what W-2s look like. This is the W-2 file from the IRS, okay? I'm going to show you some information here. I'm just going to go over it. And then I'm going to pull up instructions for some of these boxes so that we can kind of go over what they mean. I do want to give you a word of caution before we dive into W-2s. Payroll is very complex, okay? Especially if you are a small business owner that maybe owns an S corporation and you have things like healthcare, health insurance that your S corp is paying for you. There's certain changes that you need to make to your W-2. Payroll itself is also very complex, and the penalties associated with not filing things timely or depositing items timely can be substantial. So I never recommend hand filing any of this information. Okay, I really recommend using a third-party payroll provider. The reason being is because those third-party payroll providers, as long as you're giving them the information that they need in a timely fashion, they take on the responsibility for the penalties if they miss a deadline. And those penalties can really add up, especially for small employers. Okay, so I'm gonna show you how to do these, but I really, really recommend using a third-party provider, okay? At my firm, we don't hand-run payroll. It's too big of a pain. We use third-party providers, okay? So I really don't recommend that as an employer that you run it by hand, but there's always that option, right? Okay, so let's go through how to fill these out. So the employee's social security number, this information comes from the employee's W-4. So they'll fill out a W-4 when you hire them. There's a couple of other types of forms that you also need to collect. But the employee's social security number is going to come from their W-4. That goes in box A. Box B is your employer identification number. So that's your EIN number. That's your, as the employer's EIN number. Then in box C, you're going to fill out your name, your address, and your zip code. Okay? Control number. This is not something that, as a small employer, you need to have, okay? Employee's first name and initial in box E, and then their last name, and then their address and zip code in box F. Let's go look at the instructions for Form W-2, and I'll show you why you don't need a control number. Okay, so when you go through these instructions, it's a lot, right? So it's going to go through, this gives you all information about where you file, how you file, if you can e-file, if you need help, common errors on Forms W-2, and here's general instructions, who must file, who can sign the forms, all that good stuff, okay? This is where you send the forms. Let's get down into special reporting situations for W-2s, but let's get to the nitty-gritty. This is why I don't recommend filing W-2s on your own. It's pretty complex. It's not fun. Penalties are steep. Okay. Here we go. So box A, box B, box C, control number. Okay. So right here, you may use this box to identify individual Form W-2s. You do not have to use this box. I think control numbers, if we have like a large employer or if they're using like a third party administrator to help them with their payroll, there might be a control number. It specifically says on here though, you do not have to use this box. So please feel free to leave it empty if you're filling out W-2s, okay? Now, box 1 has wages, tips, and other compensation. Let's go back to the general instructions. So this is where you show the total taxable wages, tips, and other compensation that you paid. It doesn't include effective deferrals, and it includes these items right here. So there's a lot of information here. Notice that certain fringe benefits are taxable and go in box 1, so you'll have to know which fringe benefits, if you have any, are taxable. Certain employee business expense reimbursements are taxable, so you'll need to go in and see. The cost of accident and health insurance premiums for 2% or more shareholder employees paid by an S corporation. What this means is that if you own at least 2% of an S corporation, if you have accident and health insurance premiums being paid from the S corporation, the amount of that actually goes into box 1 on your form W-2. It's just not subject to Social Security and Medicare, okay? You're still being taxed on it as an employee though. Taxable benefits from a cafeteria plan, different employee and employer contributions. So there's a lot of information, a lot of amounts that get added to box 1, okay? That's what I'm saying. It's best to not file these unless you really want to, because you're a very, very, very small employer. Federal income tax withheld is going to go in box 2, right here. So you're going to have wages, tips, and other compensation in box 1. Box 2 has federal income tax withheld. This is only the income tax portion. It's not the Social Security or the Medicare portion. That comes next. So Social Security wages goes in box 3. Social Security wages is probably going to be different than wages, tips, and other compensation. Okay, certain items are subject to Social Security or not subject to Social Security, different than federal income tax. Then you're going to have your Social Security tax withheld. So this is the employee portion of the Social Security tax. It's not the full employee and employer portion. It's only the part that the employee contributed to. You're going to have Medicare wages and tips, and then Medicare tax withheld. And you're going to have Social Security tips, and then allocated tips, okay? Box 9 is blocked out for now. They're saving that for later. 10 is dependent care benefits. So dependent care benefits are like a benefit that a business may pay to employees to help them with dependent care. If you have that kind of plan, that's going to sit in dependent care benefits. 11 is non-qualified plans. A lot of these boxes right here, like if you have box 10 through box 12D, these items, if you're utilizing these items, you probably need a third party to help you with your payroll. These are where benefits go. So let me show you what kind of sits in here. Okay, so dependent care benefits, box 10. This is the total dependent care benefits under Dependent Care Assistance Program through Section 129, paid or incurred by you for your employee, okay? Non-qualified plans. So the purpose of box 11 is for the Social Security Administration to determine if any part of the amount reported in box 1 or box 3 and or 5 was earned in a prior year. Box 12 codes. So boxes 12A through 12D are essentially where you put additional information, and instead of putting like a additional box for each potential item, you're going to select codes, and then you'll put the amount for that particular code. These codes can be extensive. So like codes D through H, these have elective deferrals, Roth contributions. You may have contributions to a 401k plan that sit in box 12. Additional codes. So code D is that 401k. All of these codes. Code J is non-taxable sick pay. Code L is substantiated employee business expense reimbursements. Code P is excludable moving expense reimbursements, paid directly to a member of the U.S. Armed Forces. So there's all sorts of different items. Code T is adoption benefits. You can have a wide variety of benefits here, and that's where box 12 is where that information sits and is reported. Okay. All right. Okay, so box 13, right here, there's a checkbox that says statutory employee, retirement plan, and third-party sick pay. This gives information on what that means. So statutory employees, you're going to check that box if you have a statutory employee. You're going to check the box if there is a retirement plan, if the employee was an active participant in that retirement plan for any part of the year. Third-party sick pay, you're going to check that box if you are subject to this third-party sick pay payer filing a Form W-4 for an insured's employee, or they are an employer reporting sick pay payments made by a third party. Okay? Box 14 is other. So, for example, if you included 100% of a vehicle's annual lease value in the employee's income, it must also be reported here. So these boxes are additional items. Then we get to box 15 through 20, and that deals with the state and local income taxes. Okay? So this is where state wages live, state withholding, your identification number as an employee, as an employer in specific states. So that's where those items are. So this is Form W2. Form W2 gets filed through the Social Security Administration. Okay, you also need to send a copy to your employee because this is how they are going to file their taxes, right? So you'll notice that this one goes to the Social Security Administration, copy A. There's multiple copies here. Copy 1 is for state, city, or local tax department. Copy B to be filed with the employee's federal tax return. So this one goes to the employee. You're going to have directions with it. This is for the employee's record, is copy C. And then copy 2 is to be filed with the employee's state, city, or local income tax return. Okay, they might need to make copies, right? And the copy D is your copy. So they may need to make copies of those just because they might have more than one state or one locality that they're filing with. So that's Form W2. Form W2 is filed with the Social Security Administration. It has to be filed with Form W3. Let me see if I can pull that up for you real quick. Form W3 looks like this, and it gives you the total. So you are going to total up all of your W2s because the IRS wants to make sure that when you submit 10 W2s, it adds up to your W3, right? If your W3 doesn't match your W2s, then something wonky is happening. So your W3 should always match your W2. As a tip, your W3 is also going to tie into your income tax return for your business. Okay? Your W3 also should tie into your income tax return for your business. There are places where you put wages and that kind of stuff on your tax return. You're reporting your wages another place. You're reporting your wages on W3. If your W3 says that you paid $100,000 in wages, but your income tax return says you paid $300,000, the IRS is going to have questions. Okay? So they need to reconcile to each other. So that is Form W3. So really quick, I'm going to reiterate the forms that are filed on the federal side. We have your 941s, which are quarterly. If you are a very, very small business, you may file 944s instead of 941s. It's probably unlikely. that any of you are that small. So you may file Form 944 instead of 941s. 941s are quarterly, 944 is annual. If you're an agricultural employer, then you would file 943 annually. Okay, so those are your withholding forms. 940 covers your federal unemployment. That's an annual form that you need to file. And then you also need to file forms W2 and W3. W2s and this W3 are filed with the Social Security Administration, not the IRS like most people think. And that's, obviously, we're all pretty much familiar with W2s, right? Now, on the state side, states vary. Some states don't have a personal income tax, okay? So some states, you don't have state withholding. However, you need to confirm what you have going on with the state. When it comes to annual forms that you may need to file in January with the state, you are probably going to need to submit the W-2s to the state if there's an income tax return, okay? They're going to be looking for W-2s. These states have different ways that you submit those W-2s. So you have W-2s. You're going to have reconciliation forms or withholding forms at the state level as well. Sometimes the states will have like a quarterly form or a monthly form, and then they'll also have like an annual reconciliation form for the withholding. So it's kind of like they have like a 944 and a 941 in a way. So they'll have like this quarterly reporting where you report your withholding throughout the year, but then you have to reconcile it at the end of the year, and it also has to reconcile to your W-2s. So that's something that you might see. State unemployment is going to have its own forms. Those might be quarterly. There may be an annual true up there. Just make sure you understand what your filing requirements are for unemployment at the state level. Localities, so different cities may have, or counties may have income tax as well. So some states have this. I know like the state of Ohio, we have it. Some states just don't even have personal income tax. So for localities, you know, it's pretty unlikely that you would have that. And then other states have state level income tax, but the localities don't. So you want to make sure that you understand if your local cities or counties have taxes that you need to pay and any payroll taxes. Those generally look like a withholding form, maybe monthly or quarterly, and then potentially an annual true up, along with having to submit your W-2s, so copies of those W-2s. So just make sure you know your state and your city requirements as well. Hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions, let me know, and I will see you guys next time.